am going to talk about consciousness and behavior from the neuroscience perspective. Neuroscientists also, like philosophers, find it very hard to define consciousness. Some scientists claim that the definition of consciousness is an evolving subject. But for simplicity, the basic definition of consciousness would be awareness of the external world, the sight, sound, smell, and other sensations we get about the external world so that we can construct a picture of the external world inside. It is also about awareness of one's own self, one's own body, one's own existence in the world. How your systems perform, you are conscious of it. Consciousness has been classically put into 3 stages: wakefulness, sleep, and dreaming. This is the modern neuroscientist concept of consciousness. But look at this. Thousands of years back, even Upanishads talked about wakefulness, sleep, which could be either dreamless sleep or sleep with dream. And they also talked about pure consciousness beyond these 3 stages, which neuroscientists are yet to discover. And neuroscientists, we claim that brain is the seat of consciousness. What is behavior then? The behavior can be defined again from a neuroscience perspective as the response of the organism to the external environment. The signals from external environment are picked up by sensory receptors and conveyed through sensory nerves to the brain. The brain interprets these signals, compares with already stored information, and then gives command to the motor system to produce appropriate behavior. For this to occur, you need consciousness in the brain. So what do I mean by appropriate behavior? If I am giving a lecture to a set of students, they are attentive. They are not laughing or shouting. Or if a tragedy occurs in your family, you feel sad, you cry, you don't laugh. That is the appropriate behavior I am talking about. So the behaviors can be motor behavior, which could be walking, jumping, cycling, throwing. Or it could be an emotional behavior: anger, happiness, joy, crying, depression. Also, behavior could involve higher mental functions: learning, memory, complex thoughts, planning complex events. Is this the property of mind that we are eliciting behavior? Even if you consider that, mind is again the product of brain. So brain is a seat of consciousness, and brain is where it is the set of behaviors also programmed. So we need to understand about the human brain. Human brain is the ultimate creation of God. It is not my statement. Dr. Abdul Kalam, when he was the President of India, you all must be knowing him, he made this statement. It is indeed one of the most complex structures. It weighs 1.2 kilograms in weight, and it has got lots of crests and valleys we call sulcus and gyrus. There are dedicated regions for visual perception, somatosensory perception. Somatosensory, I mean touch, pain, temperature. Auditory perception, hearing. Olfactory perception for smell, and also for taste perception. In addition, portion of the brain, precentral gyrus, is dedicated for motor behavior, and we also have regions of the brain where complex thinking process occurs, planning, memory, learning occur. And deep inside the brain are structures which we call as limbic system, that is responsible for your emotional behavior. And if you look at the organization of the brain, you talk about astronomical figures. There are something like 100 billion neurons which are present in the brain. Neurons are the structural and functional units of the brain. And each neuron is capable of giving 1,000 to 10,000 synapses. Now if you count the total number of synapses, these are the connectivity from one neuron to the other. You are talking in terms of trillions. And this not only neurons, you have got astroglial cells or glial cells, astroglia, microglia and oligodendrocytes. They outnumber neurons by 15 to 30 times. Again you are talking in terms of trillions. Indeed, it is astronomical. We need to know a lot about how these neurons communicate, what is the role of astrocytes. So if you look at the space, the total length of wiring in human brain is 10 to the power of 8 meters. This is 15 times the radius of our earth. Imagine this. This is something incredible. And how these neurons communicate with each other. When the signals are received by the cell body through dendrites, the signals are processed and integrated. Then the neuron decides whether it needs to communicate with the other neurons. Once the decision is made, the action potential or electrical activity is produced, which passes down the axon and reaches the synaptic site. There it releases the chemicals called neurotransmitters, which act on the second neuron. We call it postsynaptic neuron, and stimulate the postsynaptic neurons. So as neuroscientists and neurophysiologists, we would like to understand how these neurons produce this signal and communicate with each other, and how these neurons are connected with each other, and what is the relationship between the connectivity and behavior also. These are all not fixed connections. The connections can keep on changing. This we call as a unique property of the nervous system, namely neural plasticity. The ability of the nervous system to undergo structural changes, biochemical changes, physiological changes. Ultimately, this may result in behavioral changes. So if you find my lecture interesting, your nerve cells can form new processes and new synapses can be generated. and your attention to my talk, what you can take out of my talk, enhances. On the other hand, if you find my talk boring and some of the existing processes can be withdrawn and active synapses can become silent synapses. And we also call something like progressive plasticity. If the neural processes increase, the arborization enhances, more synapses are formed, the organism can learn better. Probably indulging in yoga, practicing yoga can produce this progressive plasticity. There is an enrichment of connectivity in the nervous system. So you can learn things better and your cognitive performance also could be vastly improved. On the other hand, there is something called regressive plasticity. If the processes are withdrawn and if the number of synapses also go down, which occurs in the case of depression, which occurs in the case of stress. But there is an opportunity here. By enhancing the progressive plasticity, you can combat the regressive plasticity. So, practicing yoga, through that you can overcome depression and stress. That's what I want to communicate. The consciousness is formed because of sensory input we get from the external world. So we need to understand little bit about the different sensory modalities. The different sensory modalities are vision, hearing, olfaction, taste, and also somatosensory system about touch, pressure, temperature, pain, and proprioception, about the position of your joints and muscles. Visual system is something which, as neuroscientists and neurophysiologists, we have understood a lot. The light passes through the cornea, lens, vitreous humor, and strikes the retina. The retina is the receptor for the light. The retina consists of photoreceptors, bipolar cells, ganglion cells, amacrine cells. It's a complex structure. Once the light stimulates the photoreceptors, namely rods and cones, it is converted to electrical signal, and the ganglion cells take this signal to the thalamus, and which a part of thalamus called lateral geniculate nucleus, from there to the primary visual cortex and associated higher visual centers. So we see initially the external world as lines and bars and some movement. Ultimately, thanks to our conscious perception, we are able to put together the light, lines, bars, colors, and reconstruct them as a wholesome object, and we can determine the color of the object, and also we can determine the movement of the object. With regards to hearing, the sound waves go through the external ear and hits the tympanum, that is the eardrum, then passes through the middle ear and goes to the inner ear and stimulate the organ of Carti, which is the receptor for the sound system. There electrical signals are generated, and these signals pass through the sensory fibers, auditory nerve, through the thalamus and reach the auditory cortex. And here the attributes of sounds are perceived: pitch, rhythm, frequency, etc. But again, we don't perceive pitch as separately, rhythm as separately. We are able to reconstruct to it a beautiful sound, a beautiful music, which we all enjoy. A beautiful sound of Vedic chanting, which we love it. And we are also able to discriminate a horrible noise, the Bangalore traffic, everybody is honking. So that also, we are able to discriminate that. And that is again due to conscious perception which takes place in the brain. And with regards to olfactory system, the molecules, chemical molecules floating in the air, which go and strike your olfactory epithelium, and the olfactory epithelium respond to these odor molecules, generate electrical impulses which go to olfactory bulb. There it gets processed, and through mitral cells, the second order of neurons, impulses are conveyed to olfactory cortex and several areas in the limbic system. And we don't perceive them as chemical molecules. We perceive them as nice aroma when basmati rice is being cooked, and our appetite gets increased because of the aroma which we are able to discriminate. And also we can discriminate the foul smell coming from a gutter. So again, thanks to conscious perception, we are able to distinguish so many different types of smell and respond accordingly. And with regards to gustatory system, taste, the receptors for taste are located in the tongue. They are called taste buds. Again, some chemical molecules stimulate these taste buds. And 5 basic tastes which are recognized are salty, bitter, sweet, sour, and savory. Then we are also able to appreciate them. Oh, what a lovely tasting food it is, And for me, I love sweets. When I eat these sweets, oh wonderful, what a pleasant experience I am getting eating this sweet. You may be wondering how the brain receives signals about different tastes. The electrical signals which are generated by different molecules in the taste buds are carried through cranial nerves number 7, 9 and 10, and through the thalamus it reaches the cortex. Sometimes when you enjoy good food, the sense of olfaction and the taste work together, so you enjoy your food much better. Now we come to somatosensory system. The somatosensory system represents touch, temperature, pain and proprioception. You have got separate receptors for these different modalities of sensation. For example, there are specific touch receptors, specific receptors for temperature, nociceptors for pain, and proprioceptive receptors for information about the position of joints and muscles. These signals pass through dorsal root ganglia nerve fibers, reach the spinal cord, from then onwards to thalamus and to specific regions in the somatosensory cortex. And in addition, the brain receives information about the status of different organs which we have. about the heart, about the respiratory system, about the gut, about the excretory system, and so on. So the status of how these organs are working, and is there anything wrong about the functioning of this organs, the brain becomes aware of it. It is very important. What is perception? This is a vexing question which neuroscientists are constantly trying to understand. I would say we have not clearly understood yet. See, perception of any sensory modality is not just receiving signals from the receptors, and it involves both bottoms up and top down processing. What is the bottoms up processing? The sensory fibers from the receptors convey the information to the brain. And as I mentioned to you about the visual system, we do not perceive the color separately. We do not perceive the form of an object separately. We do not perceive the motion of an object separately. Everything is put together and we appreciate the wholesome object. The color, the form, as well as the movement of the object, and also we identify what the object is. And this is because of our perception. So we believe as neuroscientists that in addition to sensory input we receive from different parts of the body and different modalities like visual system, hearing, smell, touch, somatosensory inputs, there is also a top-down approach or top-down program. There are signals which are generated within the brain itself which interact with the sensory input which is received from different regions of the body. There is an elaboration of the sensory input. There is an abstraction of the sensory input. There is actually a mental reconstruction of all the sensory input. And when you do this mental reconstruction, your consciousness is generated. I have to tell you that we need to know more about how this process actually occurs, the top-down approach. We have very little evidence, but indeed a lot of speculation. And I also told you consciousness is about awareness. In addition to all the inputs which we receive through sensory modalities, there is also something called reticular activating system, which is located deep inside our brain, which constantly keeps us aware of what is happening. It provides critical input for our awareness. Okay, we talked about all this wakefulness, awareness, responsive to external world, responsive to internal world. I told you in the beginning that there are 3 stages of consciousness. The next stage of consciousness following wakefulness is sleep. Sleep is something very important. It represents altered state of consciousness. We are less responsive to sensory input. We turn ourselves off, but doesn't mean that we lose our consciousness. We get up when we hear a loud sound. We can be woken up from our sleep. In a living person, there is a situation when you lose your consciousness. What is it? When you undergo general anesthesia for a surgery, at that time you almost lose your consciousness. consciousness. And in the coma also, there could be an irreversible loss of consciousness. Fortunately, when you undergo general anesthesia, it's a reversible state, hopefully, and that is important. So sleep is something which we require because it is responsible for rejuvenation of our system. We need that rest. Rest for your skeletal system, rest for your muscle system, and a whole lot of things happening, including reinvigoration of your immune system, endocrine system. So all these things are necessary. Sleep can be divided into non-REM sleep and REM sleep. NREM or non-REM sleep represents 4 stages. Stage 1, Stage 2, Stage 3 and Stage 4. This is based on EEG recording, electroencephalogram recording. So at the Stage 1 sleep, eyes closed, relaxed, you get alpha waves. Stage 2, you get sleep spindles. Stage 3, theta waves. Stage 4, you get delta waves. So if you look at sleep, especially the 3rd and 4th stage represent deep sleep. And there is also something called paradoxical sleep, REM sleep, dreams. I told you there are 3 stages of consciousness according to neuroscientists anyway. Wakefulness, sleep, we mean NREM sleep, and dreams, dreaming. That represents REM sleep. Rapid eye movement occurs. And it is also a paradoxical sleep because if you look at the EEG, it represents kind of wakefulness type EEG, highly desynchronized. You get beta waves. And there is a vivid recollection which occurs during dreaming. And you can recall past memories also, past incidents also. You are able to narrate the whole thing when you get up. And the REM sleep is also important for taking rest. It's just non-REM sleep alone. So the REM sleep or dreaming represents the 3rd stage of consciousness. So now let's go back to our Upanishads, especially Mandukya Upanishad. What does it state? Thousands of years back, that consciousness represents wakefulness, sleep without dream, sleep with dream, and also pure consciousness, the 4th stage. And it could be divided into so many subclasses also. And philosophers talk about this 4th stage of consciousness, Thureya. And spiritualists talk about this. But the neuroscientists are unable to explain at this moment what is the basis for this 4th stage of consciousness. But it is important for us to understand. We have a lot of new technologies which have come through. Sophisticated EEG, sophisticated MRI system, sophisticated MEG, magnetoencephalography, and PET, positron emission tomography. So we have all the technologies available now. And this is the time to explore the brain further and see whether we can define the neural basis of pure consciousness also. I have to remind you, what we understand as of now is only 20% of our brain. Still 80% left to be explored. One day, probably we may find the basis for the pure consciousness also. Thank you.